once that we got to keep the rules, but sometimes I like it when there's more people come into the room to listen to a talk than there's space for them. Remember, many of the beautiful talks which I've given in my life as a monk, people still keep coming in until sometimes over in Singapore, I remember they'd even start sitting on the stage. It's the only place they could sit. It broke many regulations, but it really has some good atmosphere. Over here in Australia as well, I remember just going to give a talk at Melbourne University. They had a very good Buddhist club for the students there. And one of the professors, he was in charge of it. And so it was a very good talk, very popular. So people started coming into the lecture room. There wasn't enough seats, so they sat in between and on the side. And the people were supposed to be keeping all the regulations, what do you call it, the attendants, the ushers or whatever. But anyway, they were totally incompetent, and students kept coming in until it broke the regulations so badly that they decided the only way to get some order in the hall where I was going to give the talk was to lock all the doors. So they locked all the doors so no more people can come in. And that's when I saw through the glass the professor who was supposed to be in charge of this was outside. Even he couldn't get in. He was just waving at me, so of course I waved back. You came too late. But those were great times because they gave atmosphere. People actually wanted to be there. And it made me give a much more interesting talk, especially when you don't plan it. And what I wanted to talk about today, that somebody came to monastery today, and one of the questions they asked me, I don't like giving Dhamma talks, but I mean that, because that means you prepare for them and they're all formal and they're all almost, what we're going to talk about. But this I always like to start with something and then to see where it leads to. It's much more exciting and interesting for me. I know that sometimes people say, AjahnBrahm, all your stories and your jokes, we've heard them so many times. And as I emphasize to you, I've heard them more times than you have. But it's nice to actually rearrange them, jumble them up, and just see what comes out. And this was where that they asked me some questions which, for years people haven't asked me. And it was, how come I'm a Buddhist? Because honestly, there's no one in my family, no one, could even spell the word Buddhist, let alone know what it meant. That's why a lot of times, if you ever come across this, they call it Buddhist. Are you a Buddhist? It's sounding more like voodoo than Buddhism. But nevertheless, the only reason I got into Buddhism was that I was really good at maths. I love math. You know why I love maths? Because you have some funny stories with maths. Here they come now. This is the usual joke which I tell about maths. Listen carefully. 26 sheep in a field. 10 die. How many survive? 26 sheep in a field. 10 die. How many survive? And the answer is 10, which you've all worked out by now, haven't you? 26 sheep in a field. Listen. That's why they died, because they were sick. So, oops. There's only a bit of phlegm in my throat. So this is actually just, whenever you do things, you can always make some fun with it. When it's fun with it, it gets very, very interesting. And when it gets very, very interesting, it's always a joy to do. So I loved doing maths. And then when we were doing some maths, that because it was easy and I loved doing it, that was when I started passing exams. And I also remember some other funny stories with doing maths. I used to do some of the best math homework at school. and listening to my favourite musicians at the same time. And I remember my father, he tried to scold me. He said, "Son, you can't do your math homework and listen to Jimi Hendrix at the same time." I don't know if you know Jimi Hendrix, that's my generation. But, that was like rock music. And I said, "Well, here's my results, Dad." Oh, top of the class, I'm getting A's everywhere. And so I said, "Look, you see, I'm enjoying myself and I'm getting really good scores." And I often mention that to people. If you are trying to do an exam or doing studies and you're not enjoying it, you're not really engaging in it. Because you're not really engaging in it, that distracts you more than anything else. So because I was getting top marks all the time, they would carry on. It's a really good argument, if you haven't got much authority as a little kid. But anyhow, I do remember just, once I did start getting big scores at school, you get these things called school prizes. And, I was respectful, good kid, and I said, "I got a school prize, now what do I do?" And my teacher said, "There's a big bookshop in Charing Cross Road in London called Foyle's Bookshop. Go there and buy a book of math." I never objected at the time, but even when he said that, I knew, no way I'm going to get my first school prize on a book of math. Must be more to the world than doing sums. So, Foyle's Bookshop was a big old bookshop in Charing Cross Road in London, and they had the ordinary, the respectful part of Foyle's Bookshop, but they had the opposite side of the road, the annex. And there were about 6 stories to this big bookshop, and on the top story, in the attic, you always get some really interesting things in attics. That's why I kind of like attics. And in this attic, they had all of the dodgy stuff. Please excuse me, Eastern religions, some very psychic stuff, which I'm always really interested in. One of the books which I got told off by my teacher. He said, "You can't get a book like this." He said, "I did the results, I did the exams, I got the good scores, I choose the book." And it was the, what was it? Well, one of these Tibetan books. That's a Lobsang Rampa, that's right, the third eye. Wow. Lobsang Rampa, the third eye, because I remember my headmaster, he had to present that to me. He didn't like that. I was doing good, so he can't object to it. And other books on Buddhism, and I got a copy of the Holy Quran and the Bhagavad Gita and quite a few other books. I wanted to find out about these things. I told a person today, I call this, spirituality is important, so this is doing market research. If you can get a car, many of you have cars, you don't just go and get the car which your father had, or your grandfather, your family have. You just go and what's the best for your budget and for what you like. So that became so obvious to me. That was Buddhism. Just I liked it. It made sense to me. But interestingly, maybe this happens to you. I've known that many people have the same experience. It wasn't that it converted me. It was just I found out who I already was. I already was a Buddhist. Things like rebirth, things like the importance of virtue, things like even meditation or stillness. I love stillness. I know I could have been enlightened so much faster if I hadn't had stupid teachers. And those teachers would ask me, "What do you think about this problem?" I said, "Nothing." And I got punished. If they had appreciated, if it was a Buddhist school, they said, "What do you think about that?" "Nothing." "Wow, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu." You get top of the class. Because we think too much, and we do think too much, we know too little. Thinking is just the names, descriptions. I still remember, again this is one of the things you've heard before, I am sure, if you've got good memories, that going to Dhammaloka, the nuns' monastery. And because I don't have much time, that's when they said, oh, can you give us a teaching before you go back and wherever you're going next? And I said, yeah, okay. But if you're going to give a teaching, give it sort of brief, powerful, to the point. So I asked them, said, where's the toilet? Come on, that's profound when you see what's coming next. So where's the toilet? I need to go to the toilet. They were surprised because I've been there so many times, I know where the toilets are, the male toilets. So they're over there. So off I went, and they were right, there's a little door there, and on the door it said, men's toilet. I have to be careful as a monk. The reason I say be careful as a monk, because sometimes you go to the men's toilet and you look at your robes and you think, am I in the right cubicle? You know what I mean? This looks more like a lady's dress, doesn't it? So, but anyway, I knew where I was going. So anyway, I went to the men's toilet. They had on there, in the men's toilet. I never opened the door yet. I just pretended. I didn't expose myself, I'm a good monk. I pretended to urinate on the door. Many of the bhikkhunis at Dhammaloka suspected me a lot of being a bit, old and crazy. I think it confirmed their suspicions. Said, no, what are you urinating on the door for? I never did it, okay, I just pretended. I said, well, it says, toilet. That's what it says, that's what I'm doing. He said, no, the toilet's inside the door. Well, why didn't you put those instructions on the door? Men's toilet inside the door. And what I was saying there, just how instructions can be logical but meaningless. Which is one of the reasons why the words are never enough to describe what you're really supposed to be doing. That's kind of one of the reasons why. I don't know about you, I really loved poetry when I was young, at that age. And the reason I loved poetry, because poetry was painting a picture with words. It wasn't using the words to create arguments which you debate with other people. I remember one of my favourite poems, the first line, very famous, Wordsworth, I wandered lonely as a cloud. What does that mean? You mean levitating up in the sky somewhere? Anyway, in Australia, especially in the UK at that time, we didn't like clouds. Clouds meant it rained. There's too much drizzle over in UK. It'd be nice here to have a few clouds. But anyway, the whole idea of that, it wasn't supposed to be specific. It was a sense of freedom, like a cloud floating in the sky, going with the wind wherever you need to go. It had a sense of beauty. You could feel it. And when you feel it and tasted it, you knew much more of what it was trying to show you. And so some of those ways of using language, they weren't supposed to be specific. They're supposed to evoke emotions and feelings. They're a different type of language. These days, of course, we call that emotional intelligence. To feel rather than be precise. And those sorts of things really opened up a lot of different ways of knowing things and feeling things and conveying it to other people. So when I saw that in his Buddhist books and all these wonderful metaphors of, what is like precepts. Are you supposed to be a good person because you keep this rule and that rule and some other rules? A lot of times if you try to keep rules, you're so tense. You're worrying about what you're going to do next. How many rules do the monks have? Venerable?
227.
You pass. 227 main ones, but lots of other ones as well. Imagine what that must be like. You know, living a life you always have to worry about what rule you have to keep or what rule you're going to break. And that's even worse for the bhikkhunis, the nuns. They have 311. And sometimes, somebody asked me that question, was it here or... I think it was over in Vietnam where I was last week. They asked me, it's amazing as a monk. And that's why I wasn't here last week. I was in Vietnam, giving some talks. That's why I know when I was a kid, they used to have a saying, just to join the Navy and see the world. They got it totally wrong. Become a monk and see the world. I don't see that much. But what you do, you can actually just be able to relate to others and just to see this huge world with so much different ways of saying things, and just how people can be so kind and friendly and helpful. You see what the meaning of this life is. It was just about, Vietnam or Australia or Bangkok or any other country which you come from. That is really a small world. When you get into the people's hearts, every time that people laugh, they always share the common language of happiness. You don't need to know the word for it in this dialect or that dialect. You can see people enjoying the moment and laughing. You can smile with people, and the people you smile with, they smile back, and you actually create that sort of connection, even though you can't say much more. But still, there's a joy there to saying you're a fellow human being in this world with the same difficulties and the same joys. And why can't we walk in the same path together? And of course you can. There's beautiful acts of forgiveness and kindness which you see in this world. So anyway, when I started reading those books, that's the sorts of things which they meant to me, and it made a lot of sense. Because it made a lot of sense, I said, okay, I'll put my hand up, I'll be a Buddhist. But what do you do next? You guys don't realize how fortunate you are. You have a Buddhist club here, our Buddhist center. It's totally for free. Oh, sorry, no, it's not for free. It's priceless. It makes it, when you say for free, a lot of people think, oh, it's not worth anything. You say priceless and it's beyond value. And that's one of the times I had so much fun here, messing around, answering telephone calls. I still remember this lady who called and she said, do you teach meditation? Meditation teaching, it's very popular, and sometimes the people who teach meditation make a lot of money. So they actually asked me, AjahnBrahm, do you teach meditation? I said, yeah. Do I teach meditation? No. Oh my goodness, you're going to give me the sack. Of course I teach meditation. And then she said, how much do you charge? And I said, nothing. And her next comment was, well, you can't be any good then. And she hung up. You can see her logic. Because that's true, isn't it? If it's no fee for it, of course, it can't be any good. That's how she thought. But I always think the best things in life are for free. That's why there's never any charge to come into the BSWA. Any talks. And that's one of the reasons why another person, she was a Polish lady, this second lady, she asked me, said, are you teaching meditation tonight? I said, yes. How much do I have to pay? I said, nothing. She said, no, you don't understand. How much do you have to put in the box? I said, nothing. And she said, no, you still don't understand. Dollars, cents. How much do I have to pay to get through the door? I said, lady, you don't have to pay any money at all. We're not going to take your name. We're not going to say things like there's no entrance fee, but you have to pay to get out. It's totally for free. And then she's told the question. She paused, and I really remember this, and I was very happy that she paused, because she was actually thinking. This was not something she knew before. Well, what do you guys get out of this then? And that's a question which many people ask. Why do you come here on Friday evening? Some of you have been coming here for years, for decades. Even some of these retreats which I give overseas, the same people come. And I say, how come you're coming here again? You've come on these retreats about 10 years in a row. I must be a terrible teacher. You have to keep coming back again. Imagine that I was a teacher in school. If I was a school teacher, and each one of you kept coming back not year after year, week after week, not just week after week, you come to Bodhinyana Monastery, you go down to Dhammaloka or Jhana Grove, and you keep hearing the same things. How come? I must be a terrible teacher, no one graduates. Is that the case? No. You're not going to give me the sack? Oh, it's worth a try. So anyway, it's just looking at life in a different way. You know, you're coming here, why do you go to, say, look at the beach? Why do you go to listen to maybe the favourite music you like? Why do you just go for a walk in your quiet little garden or place which gives you so much peace and happiness? Just because you repeat it doesn't mean that it's boring. It gets very valuable. You're looking at things in a different way. But anyway, reading those books, eventually, after a long while, I found out, what do you do next? Lucky here, you've got a Buddhist society. There's lots of Buddhists in Perth in these days. One of the things which I really like, they're from all over the place. From so many different countries, so many different forms of Buddhism, even in this place over here, in our Buddhist society of Western Australia. And because you come from so many different lands, and it's wonderful that you're sitting next to each other, enjoying each other's company, and getting that friendship together, which I think is so important in any spiritual life, the fellowship. You have friends, and you joke together, talk together, and that's a beautiful thing which we can spread, not just, this is not a Thai Buddhist temple. Thai Buddhists are most welcome. There's a few Thai disciples kind of grown up with me. Where's Boon gone in the back? Is he still here? Has he gone to sleep? He's there. He's outside. Oh yeah, I can see him. And so many others of you from so many different types of the world, Burmese and Sri Lankan and Bhutanese. Where else? Bangladesh? Sri Lanka? India? I better stop quickly, otherwise I'm going to get into trouble. Ukraine? Singaporean? Greek? You know there's even some Australians here. Anyhow. But as a young man, what do you do next once you decide you're a Buddhist? So what I did, once I got these, I was fortunate because I was good at math. You got this scholarship. My parents were poor. Actually, my father was penniless. He died. So eventually, a single parent looking after me, I got to this good scholarship to go to Cambridge. And I'm not proud of that, but I thought it was an interesting experience. One of the things you could do there was a very posh university. I'm surprised they let me in. But honestly about that, you know that people, what they used to call you? your official title was young gentleman. If you'd have seen me in those days, I had big bushy hair out here. I rode a motorbike, honestly, and past the fuzzy hair, that was my beard, came the other side. And the reason why I had that hairstyle, because it's very cold in the UK. You didn't need a hat. Your hair was like natural insulation. I know my grandmother used to say, you know, I can't see your head, your face. It was like incognito. But anyway, I liked it. And later on, that, you know, what do I do next? But in that university, they had a good social clubs for everybody to keep all the students happy, not just doing math and doing silly puzzles for other people. It was also to actually, they had, I know that one of the first little clubs which I saw there, they called it Hare and Hounds. What does that mean? Fox hunting. Don't worry, I never joined. I was totally anti-fox hunting. But actually to see it there was weird. But the club which I saw, which I was really excited, my eyes went wide. Buddhist society. There's actually a Buddhist society there. Yay! That's how I felt the first time I could meet other people who had similar ideas about spirituality. And I told today, I said, I want to join. I went up to the counter. They're not just asking, just what do you do and what do you get out of joining. I want to join. And the way that Buddhism works, I think you all know by now, you don't have to join. I'm sorry, Mrs. President, I know you want to get people to join. But you don't have to. Sometimes people keep coming every week. They're not harassed. You know, do you want to join? Do you want to do this? It was just, I really, really wanted to. So I went up there and said, I want to join. And the guy at the counter said, you don't have to. I said, look, but I want to. No, that's not Buddhism. In Buddhism, it's come and see. See if you like it. We don't sort of get involved with the money side of things. Just come and see. And at that point, the annual fee was £1, a British pound. That was in 1969, so it was worth a lot of money in those days, especially for a poor student. I didn't mind. I got a pound note out of my wallet. I wasn't a monk here. Slammed it on the table with a loud noise. Join me. The guy I did that to, like many of these things in life, became a lifelong friend. And that was, he came here to one of the global conferences we did here. Remember, it's Bernard Carr. And I don't know if you realize why I did this, but I made sure I would pick him up from the airport. The reason why I did that, because he came with his wife. He had a Japanese wife. And when he came with his wife, I spoke to him, just the two of us. Look, there's many things which you did when you were a student, which your wife does not need to know about. I won't tell her, as long as you don't tell my disciples. So we made a pact. You're students, you just mess around. And Bernard, and I never realized exactly what he did after, I became a monk and he carried on with theoretical physics. He became just one of the 2 or 3 close associates of Stephen Hawkins, Professor Stephen Hawkins. Even Stephen Hawkins, went to, I think it was I don't know if he was the best man, I think he might have been, but he certainly attended the wedding of Bernard and his wife, Mary. So that's how close he was as a great physicist, Professor Bernard Carr. But not only that, he was a Buddhist. And the third thing he was he was into psychic research. It's wonderful to go hunting ghosts. There are lots of ghosts in UK. They're famous for ghosts. So there's plenty to hunt, to get photographs of them. Why, as a Buddhist, are you doing that? We want to find out the truth of things. What actually works? What happens? What are ghosts? And it's very helpful because a lot of times people trust Buddhists to understand about the nature of the mind. But not just that, okay, these holy books say this and this holy book says that. But this was the London Society of Psychic Research, which has been going for over 100 years, about 150 years now. And these are scientists do this work, like Professor Bernard Carr, Professor of Theoretical Physics. It's just a hobby, but it gives the field credibility. And the research is so strong. Results are consistent. When there are ghosts, the ghosts have never ever had any evidence of hurting a human being. You see, sometimes in a room, things go flying through the air, being hurled all over the place, but they never hit anybody. Which is kind of weird. But that's the truth of the matter. Ghosts can't hurt you. So if you ever feel that you're seeing a ghost, it feels a bit strange, please never feel afraid. There's another being in this world who just needs some kindness. And I don't know about you, but that's kind of half the meaning of life, is learning how to be kind to others. Be kind to animals, kind to snakes, and kind to... I was telling somebody about this. A lot of times people are afraid of like spiders. But because I was a monk in Northeast Thailand for such a long time, sometimes it got very hot, just like today. But the huts over in Northeast Thailand were very simple, just made out of wood, a bit of rusty iron, corrugated iron for the roof. And sometimes those poor spiders would be, under the roof to shade from the hot sun. And sometimes I wouldn't have my robe on, just my lower robe, so my chest was bare. And there were so many tarantulas. Now I'm not exaggerating, the real tarantulas would actually just live under the ceiling. And during the hot weather, sometimes they'd fall on me. Please don't say, ooh. I honestly looked forward to the tarantula falling on me. You try it one day. They had such tickly feet. They were tickly. And so once they fall on you, they'd run all over you. And that's to a monk who didn't have a TV, no entertainment. Like tarantula hour was kind of entertaining. You learn to see things in a different way. And that's what Buddhism told me. And because I wasn't scared, I was looking forward to it. Of course, they never bit you. And even if they did, what would happen if a tarantula bit you? Apparently these days, so kids tell me, you get superpowers. You don't become Spider-Man, you become Spider-Monk. So I wasn't afraid at all. But anyway, because of that, then I was also had confidence in this Buddhism and the meditation. I had very fortunate karma, I must have, that these things sorts of happened. But the fellow who taught me meditation, I didn't realize just how accurate he was in teaching meditation. But I still remember, so I was still a student, not a monk, didn't know too much about what was going on. But he said that his purpose for teaching meditation was to get you into a first jhana. That's what he said. I thought, wow. Looking back upon it so many years since that time, I was so fortunate. Because what that does, when you get these, they call them deep meditation these days. They're so difficult to talk about most times because there's a lot of controversy. What is the real jhanas? What's not the jhanas? They're very deep and very beautiful and very powerful. And that's what he's teaching. And so just after a while, you went on some of these retreats. And just like here, the people who get these experiences at AjahnBrahm, or even in here, they're not common, but they're possible. And many people actually do it. It does change your life. No, totally. And I even put my hand up these days. That's one of the reasons why I'm a monk. Just to get these deep meditations. More blissful than anything you've had before. But not just for the sake of pleasure, just the effect afterwards. You see things in a totally different way. And when that sort of happens, this is not theory anymore. It's you experiencing it. It's actually real. And once you have these real experiences and see their great benefit, that's also one of the reasons why, sometimes people said, AjahnBrahm, you're done enough now. I'm 73, I've been such a lot of work, actually building monasteries and for nuns, bhikkhunis as well, and meditation retreat centers and over the world, trying to build up Buddhism and teach. And why do you do this? Isn't it time you retired? Sometimes I joke and sometimes you joke. Because I think it's a joke, isn't it? AjahnBrahm, you're getting old. I'm not getting old. I am old. Already. I'm heritage, I'm vintage. I've got, what do they have on buildings when they can't sort of change how they look on the outside? Heritage value. That's why when people say I should lose weight, that'd be illegal. Using the heritage value of my tummy. Anyway, that's why I also told that story. Sometimes when you don't get embarrassed about things, you enjoy life. Because I was just traveling recently, people say, well, how is it when you go through airports and stuff? Now, first of all, I should have a couple of you actually coming with me when I arrive from overseas. Because in Perth airport now, they know me. When you go through the customs, they just kind of wave. They actually did wave me through this time. Didn't even check what I'd written on that arrival form. They know me and said, where's your baggage? This is my baggage, honestly. Where's all your suitcase? Don't have one. So it's so easy just to you float through the customs. Because of that, you just have few things. You don't need many things. And you just pass through so easily. It's just, I encourage you to try that. You go overseas, you can't, I don't know how many clothes you have, how many dresses, skirts, trousers, jackets. You can only wear one at a time. So anyway, that's how I kind of travel. And it's really pleasant doing that. And at the same time, I remember sometimes when people say, well, where's all your baggage? I remember one of the first times at Perth airport, I said, well, I don't have any. I said, why? I said, I'm a monk. I said, oh yeah. They started to understand, something of what a monk or a nun is supposed to do. The freedom of that. But anyway, when I went through a US airport, you had to, those are the times when you have Homeland Security and they're really afraid that people who are wearing robes, they didn't know the difference between a Buddhist monk and anybody else. And are you going to be dangerous? So they insisted, they asked me, what's underneath, your robe? And they say, is it a suicide belt? They were serious. So it's so easy, I just open up my robe. They can see inside it's just nothing, just my flesh. I said, it's fat. So it is a suicide belt. So I laughed as well. But one of the best customs officers was in Perth. When they always have to ask the same questions. In your bag, have you got any liquids or gels? Have you got any hair gel in there? They asked that, and I couldn't help but also I burst out laughing. And so did all the passengers behind me waiting in line. And so this poor guy, he was embarrassed, but he started laughing too. Okay, go through. Don't check you then, because you're not don't look dangerous. You're just laughing instead. So anyhow, where was I going with this? That's when I learned what Buddhism was, it became so much easier. But one of the things which I did find, and I say this even in a place like Cambridge University, great scientists there, but a lot of them were really stupid. And the reason I say this was we had, in this college where I was at, they had once a year the scholars' dinner. I don't mind describing this. This was this huge 9-course meal. Remember, 9 courses. This wasn't in China or Hong Kong or somewhere. Someone once tried to do that to me, I think it was in Hong Kong. They said, AjahnBrahm, instead of giving you just your normal lunch, we're going to give you this lunch in a restaurant. And before noon, 9 courses. They never told me 9 courses. And after the first couple of courses, I was already full. There's another 7 courses to go. I couldn't believe it, how much people were eating. But anyway, this was back in UK. 9 courses. And just at the end, every course, one of the interesting things, it was served by butlers. The real butlers. There's a posh university. So there's butlers, and they always had to serve a different wine with every course. That was a crazy thing. So they poured the wine, it had to come over your right shoulder. And they'd always, these were real butlers, and I thought, what am I doing here? And I went to a poor school. I don't know if you know, but the school I went to, primary school and high school, they had a famous student, more famous than I was. His name was, if any of you know, this actor called Alan Rickman. You know who Alan Rickman was? What was his popular name? Professor Snape. But anyway, these are all poor people. I was really poor at that time too. And anyway, so there you were, and all of these people, they're supposed to be smart. They're supposed to be these scholars, these future professors. And I still remember one of them was a Nobel laureate, no exaggeration, Nobel laureate in chemistry. He was there as well, and he all got drunk. We had 9, actually I should have said we had sherry beforehand, and then a 9-course meal with wine with every course, and then at the end we went into the old library for 3 glasses port, claret and Madeira, and then to top it off, absolute stupidity, they had this big goblet, about this size, actually bigger than this, bigger than that, about twice the size of this. It was filled up with one of these very expensive wines. And every one of us, including the Nobel laureate and little hairy AjahnBrahm, we had to drink it in one go, the whole lot, and then say a toast in Latin. You actually did that. I don't remember much more about it. But I do remember that was the last alcohol I ever took in my life. It's such a stupid extreme. And I was so ashamed of myself. And there's so many people, had prepared that for us as like a celebration. So much was wasted. And I thought, this is not the way of, we should practice in the world. And also in the morning, I had a big splitting headache. And people would go around saying, that was fun, wasn't it? What? I never ever want to do that again. So instead you gave it up. And you're much happier. That was when I used to, before I came over here, I came to Thailand to become a monk, I used to go and visit the Thai temple in London. It was close by, and the monks there were amenable. You could talk to them, and you can tell jokes with them. And they were like kind of fun to be with. And those are the sorts of people I wanted to imitate later on in my life. I hope I've done that by being kind, approachable, and friendly. And what that also meant was, after going there for a while, one of the monks asked me, they said, you've been coming here for a while. I think it's about time you took the 5 precepts. The Sinha, Pansil. And I said, Venerable, what are the 5 precepts? When he told me what they are, an arrogant young man, about 20 years of age, I said, Sir, I don't need to take the 5 precepts from you. I've been keeping them for about the last 3 years without breaking any. I was a vegetarian then, I don't kill anything. I must admit, when my father died, I did kill a mouse. Because my mother was terrified of mice. And I was taking the position of like the male in the house. It's only a small apartment. I don't know if you've ever done anything like that, kill a mouse. But I heard the trap snap shut. And I checked it, and there's this poor mouse. I caught the mouse. It was dead. Please excuse me, I can still remember it to this day. I never forget that. This mouse, it was still warm. And it was just so pure and soft and clean. I was kind of stroking it. And as I took it to the place where the rubbish was put away, it was dead by now. But I felt so sad and kind of guilty. I never, ever, ever, ever wanted to do that ever again. And to this day, I like mice. And sometimes people say, health, we've got to keep, like the kitchen, where you go and have a cup of tea or some orange juice later on, keep that free of mice. I've seen mice in there many times. I won't tell you. They're just running around, they're not doing any harm. It's kind of an overreaction, too much fear to think that the mice and the droppings will cause you trouble. They're just having fun. It's a Buddhist place, so I think this Buddhist place should not just be for Thais and Sri Lankans and Burmese and Singaporeans and Greeks and Indians and Australians. It should be for mice as well. Non-discrimination. Sometimes when you see them and you can touch them and they befriend you, then it's beautiful to watch. I still remember this story. Somebody got me a cutting from a US newspaper that somebody actually caught a mouse in the house which they were living, and it was in kind of these, we call them Buddhist mouse traps. They don't kill the mouse, they just capture them. And I thought, what do we do next? So this guy, it's a new house, and so he had a bonfire in his garden, and he threw that poor little mouse on the bonfire. But this is a mouse's revenge. The mouse, it was burned, it was hurting, but it wasn't killed. And he ran as fast as he could into the house. And as he ran through the open window, his fur brushed against one of the curtains, and the curtain got on fire, and it burnt the whole house down. I wish he hadn't done that to the mouse. But someone said, I shouldn't say this. Sometimes I thought, serves you right. Don't ever do that again. He lost his whole house, burnt to a shred. So anyhow, so sometimes we learn this kindness in life. So I would never ever sort of harm any animal. And sometimes you go to extreme lengths to protect them, if at all possible. You got lovely stories. I told this story, I'm not sure if I told it to you recently, but there's tales of forest monks. Because most of people like me in Asia, Southeast Asia, they actually live in jungles. And there's one monk, old monk, he wrote some stories about some of his experiences living in jungles as a simple living monk. And he said that one evening, late in the evening, maybe 11 o'clock or something, that there's somebody knocked on his door. It's the middle of nowhere. And he wasn't afraid, because he's a monk. So he opened the door, and what he saw there was a little female monkey. And the little monkey had this little baby monkey in its hand, in its hands, and looked incredibly sad. It was the mother monkey's child. And this baby monkey this monkey handed its baby over to the monk. It had died. And this little monkey, trusted this monk. It's not the same species, but it seemed always being kind and caring. And so, out of desperation, presented its baby to the monk, just in the hope that the monk could somehow have some medicine or chanting or do something to help its dead child. And of course the monk, nothing he could do, it was really dead. So the monk just did some chanting for the baby monkey and handed it back to the mother. And the mother just went through the door and just did its grief in the forest by itself. What I loved about that story is even animals will trust one another. Humans and primates. And will just ask anything you can do to help. And couldn't. So those are kind of some of the stories of kindness which I really make me just, I'll never forget that story. The beautiful stories of how the world will respond to you in a positive way when you look at it in a positive way. Please excuse me again. Sometimes when I'm in the mood I can keep talking forever. I know many of the monks tell me that when they say it's time to eat, AjahnBrahm, we've got to stop the talk now, which I sometimes give before we have our dana. I'm supposed to stop eating before midday. And sometimes I haven't stopped talking yet. So anyway, I think that's probably enough for this evening. And now we can finish off and just have some questions and answers. Did you find that useful? Great, thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And for those who don't know, sadhu is like a Pali word. What does it mean? Awesome. I've been saying it in Pali. Okay, I've got some questions from the machine. Okay, machine questions. Friday night Dhamma talk, 28th of March by AjahnBrahm. We get some interesting questions. The first one is from Bolivia. But I must admit that once we had this question, and I think it was actually had the name Mohammed, and I think from Saudi Arabia. And I thought that's an interesting question. It was actually one of our members sitting over there. And they said, I never get my question answered. And so that was his trick, to make it a weird name. And I've even had, when I was in Melbourne, questions. One of the questions was from a Mr. Donald Trump. It was. It's just they were making it up for a joke. I don't mind that at all. And of course, once Donald Trump had his question answered, someone else, they had to follow suit. And Mr. Putin? So if you want to try that, well done. Okay, from Bolivia first of all. I think some people connected and learned Buddhism in this life are due to a combination of good karma in past life and their kindness. Am I right? Yes. It's not just this life, it's impossible. One of the things which my friends pointed out when I was at Cambridge, I never wore socks. I had some flip-flop sandals and would just walk in the snow, just with those. I never kind of felt the cold, just flip-flops, that's all I had. And I didn't feel cold. Even now, I remember every time I go to UK, someone tries to give me some socks. I put them in my bag, and I usually give them away when I get to the other end. Because my feet are very, very, very healthy feet. So I don't feel the cold, and that can't be from this life. That's why, I really do suffer in places like Perth when it gets hot. Fortunately, it's cooler this evening. But whenever there's hot weather, I've said this, whenever I teach retreats, I always comment that some people are listening to me giving a talk and they're wearing blankets around them. So how can you do that? You must be boiling inside. Anyway, question 2. How does Buddhism view about natural disasters? What does it teach us and how to deal with them? It's just the uncertainty of life. Look, natural disasters are always going to be there. And sometimes, if I give a bad talk, then I am the natural disaster. But laughing at them, and it gives us opportunities to help others. One of the natural disasters, which I remember learning about in history, was the Great Fire of London. How many years ago? 300, 400 years ago? And that destroyed, basically the whole inner part of a city. And because that destroyed, so much of a big city at that time, it destroyed what was known as the plague, which was there the year before and spread by rats. And because that cleansed the whole area. And lastly, it gave the local government this opportunity to put in a proper sewage system in central London. And I don't know why they did this, but they designed a sewage system to work like the veins on a leaf. If you look at any of the leaves outside, especially a nice big leaf, you find that you don't get things coming in at a right angle. They go at a certain angle as they go into the main line of the leaf and the veins of a leaf. And that is by far the most efficient ecological way of actually joining big pipes to smaller pipes. And that's actually, they didn't know why that happened, but that's how they designed the early sewage system under London. It's worked so well, and they could only do that once all of the houses were removed because of the fire. Gave them a chance to really renovate, and it worked. So that was a natural disaster, but also natural disasters are also an opportunity for natural growth, for actually to seeing better ways of doing things. It's part of life. That's why, one of the things which I get involved with because of meditation, because I'm passionate about it, is that people with cancers. And it just gives me so much joy and happiness. When you have the cancer, of course you'll be afraid. But then afterwards, there's so many people survive from that, and sometimes miraculous ways. And when they do survive, so often they keep telling me, that's the best thing which ever happened to me. And I'm not saying that because that is being a bit sort of facetious. I've never had cancer in this life. But nevertheless, that's the way they say the best thing which ever happened to them. Really changed the way they look at life and become so much better human beings as a result. And that's like any disaster. Opportunities to grow, to do things better next time. Not just materially, but emotionally. Last question here. What is the best way, Shobi from UK, what is the best way to overcome negative attitude towards others? How to have compassion to all, regardless of how they treat you? When you see the results, when you have compassion to others, I remember going to this, I used to go and teach in a prison, and I was teaching a group of prisoners, obviously in jail, and just as a test, they said, well, it's loving kindness and being kind to others. That may work in the world, or no, it doesn't work in the world. It may work in your monastery or in the Buddhist Society of Western Australia, but that will never work in a prison. These are very low characters in here, and so I was not going to take that. Instead, I said, "Okay, I'll give you a test. We'll have a competition." And I asked him, in this prison, it was Carnet Prison Farm, who is the worst human being in this prison? And what he said was one of the prison officers. He was a bit biased, but it's fair enough. I said, why is he so bad? Why do you kind of hate him so much? This guy, he said, he would do anything to hurt the prisoners, even though it's not justified. He said, give an example. Last week, one of the prisoners' wives managed to get a lift to come to this prison. It's very hard for her. Prisoners' families are very poor. They struggle. It's not just the prisoner who gets punished, but the whole family. And he saw she had made it to the prison this one day. The prisoner hadn't seen her yet, so she had to check in, fill out all the forms to visit her husband. And so he sent the husband over to one of the furthest places at Carnet Prison Farm. And this man had no choice, he had to go over there. And then when his wife had checked in, then they went over the PA system. Would prisoner so-and-so please come to the visitors area? You have a visitor. And they only have 2 hours. And even though this prison officer knew that he sent the prisoner over to one of the places which didn't have a PA system to cover it, he never told people that's where he was. They kept looking for him. When they found him, I'm terribly sorry, the visiting hours are over now. And it took away the opportunity to be with his wife. He went to all that trouble to try and get there to visit him. So he said he was really, I won't say the word he said, but I'm thinking it. I said, great, we have a contest here. So I said, what to do? When you see him, actually this prisoner, he was a very intelligent guy, so he had the job of looking after the administrative ward where this prison officer worked. And said, what I want you to do, every time you see him, ask him if he wants a nice cup of tea. Find the type of tea he likes, the strength, whether he wants milk or sugar or cream. Find out what he likes. And whenever you hand it to him, always say, this is for you, sir, I hope you enjoy it. Say something kind. And I would go to that prison once every 2 weeks. And I'd check out, how's the progress? Oh, it's hopeless, Ajahn. Look, really it's hopeless. I'd really do my best to find out what he likes and give him the cup of tea. And he doesn't even acknowledge me. He doesn't even say anything. He doesn't even recognize I'm there. He just carries on doing what he's doing and is totally silent. And it was 3 months, I remember this, 3 months we got our breakthrough. he handed him a cup of tea. He said, I've got a special biscuit here for you. I hear you love these biscuits. And the prison officer went, That grunt, that's all he did was, But that grunt meant so much. That prison officer was recognizing the prisoner who'd went to all his trouble to get his cup of tea and biscuit for him was human. And then, once we had that breakthrough, like the crack in the damn wall, the rest was pretty fast. You know, you can find a nice cup of coffee, a special coffee. I think they said you really like this type of coffee, and I hope that you enjoy this. And the prison officer turned around and said, thank you. In prison, so I'm told, and I think it's true, there's a huge grapevine. Whatever happens in Carnet Prison Farm, you know, just past the monastery, they know what that happens in Mount Barker. There's a big prison over there, and every other prison in Western Australia, and also a lot of the prisons in the rest of Australia. So the prisoner said, AjahnBrahm, you won. That's gone all around sort of the local prisons in Western Australia. They can't believe that that prison officer was kind and just said thank you. And it's true. It just takes about 4 months and a lot of hard work. It does work. Okay. So I know, because I go over to Hong Kong and go to Vietnam, you know who the most famous talker is here? It's not just me. It's also good old Eddie in the back there. They ask, how's Eddie? You got anything to say? It's tradition.
AjahnBrahm, yeah, you began your talk tonight with, why am I a Buddhist?
Yeah.
Don't you think that's a very powerful question and a very interesting one too, you know?
Yeah,
I got two things to ask you, okay? The first one, why am I a Buddhist? Don't you think it could be from past conditioning?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, the past conditions are present, the present conditions are future, first one. The second one is through suffering, AjahnBrahm, you know. Through our suffering, okay, we try to find a way out, we come in contact with Buddhist talks, reading books and all these things, and we find that helped us a lot, this thing, okay? That's why we keep coming, okay? And if we go further, if we understand how the mind and the feeling works, okay, we reach enlightenment, nirvana, and we end our suffering.
Yeah, it was the end of suffering which encouraged me.
Yeah. Yep. Yes.
And when you see a monk like Ajahn Brahm, it's really impressive. You're always checking him out and seeing how he was dealing with things. And that's when, you know, he passed every test. The monk who was never unhappy. That was impressive. Okay. Are there any other questions? Does anyone else want to get famous in Vietnam? Yes? And Hong Kong and Singapore?
I'll follow Lenny's question, okay?
Go on.
Thank you. Test. We know that thoughts arise. From a Buddhist perspective, do we have any feeling where those thoughts come from?
We don't. It's like saying, where does a wind come from? We know we can feel it going past our cheeks, but when it leaves you, where does it go next? You can only know when it's happening right now. I mean, it does go. That's why it's one of the great similes of Buddhism to look at thoughts, regard them as like gusts of wind. Where they come from, who knows, but you know they go. You only know them when they're passing. So don't keep them.
Okay,
if you don't like them, then remember that piece of advice I gave you earlier. Get a lot of bushy hair and a big beard. You can hardly feel, hardly feel them.
Okay, that's probably the setup for the second part. I've been bothered by a thought to come and ask you, how are you?
How are you? And when people say that, I say that's the deepest question. First of all, how? That must be karma. Are you? And that's debatable. And you? What do you mean by you? So that's a very deep question. I wouldn't be able to answer that in about 3 or 4 Dhamma talks. Yeah.
I mean, we've only met once. I met you 28 years ago. And it's troubling to me why this thought worm has been nagging at me to come and ask you, how are you?
Yeah. So you've asked me already now, so it's answered. That's another thing which I was talking with someone today about, that sometimes when you have questions, really deep questions, then where can you find the answers? If you ask even the wisest person, they give you some more words back. It just makes more questions. But I was mentioning that one of my favourite sort of monks is a monk called Ajahn, and he was, I want to say all the reasons why I really was so inspired by him. But I went to visit him. I had my own questions. It was about 6 or 7 years as a monk. I still had some questions I wanted answered. So I went to make an appointment with him. And I had to wait for about 2 or 3 days before I could get an audience with him. When I did, I went into the room and there's this tiny monk. And he was in this kind of like a palace building built by the king of Thailand at the time, overlooking the Mekong River. It's a beautiful place. And then when I went into the room, he just lifted his eyes and looked at me. All the questions vanished. They totally disappeared. He had so much kindness and peace, and you could touch it. That's how I express it. And then I felt very stupid, but then I thought I'd have to ask a question. If I didn't, the interview would be over. There's other people waiting after me. So my question was, I was being honest. I said, the best way to answer your questions is to answer them yourself. He said, oh yeah, very good. I said to myself, think of something else to ask. Because I knew that the interview would be over. But I never wanted to leave. It was, sometimes you see a teacher, see evidence of something so kind and so wise and so peaceful. It wasn't just loving kindness, it was a sense of this amazing safety. I would never need to want for anything in the whole world. And my thought, which I did remember, was I'd have to get the strongest team of water buffalo with chains to drag me out of this place. I'm not leaving, ever. That's how you felt. A sense of peace and tranquility and comfort and safety. All those things in the world, which is why you move and are restless, were just taken away. So the cause of questions just disappeared. And that was really quite profound. Okay, I know that our poor caretaker, or caretakers, sometimes they scold me when I keep sitting here for too long, because I have to get up in the morning to do something. So we can finish off now, is that okay? Thank you. I'll bow now 3 times to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Suakato Bhagavato Dhammo Dhammang Namasa Supatipano Bhagavato Sawaka Sango Sangang Namami